Most people think having a rich mindset means thinking about money all the time, but that's not what it is. In fact, some of the poorest people mentally are the ones who obsess over appearing rich. And some of the strongest minds in the world started with nothing, no money, no status, no opportunities. So what actually separates people who grow from people who stay stuck? Why do some people slowly build discipline, intelligence, patience, emotional control, confidence, and long-term success, while others repeat the same destructive patterns for years? Why do some people invest in themselves naturally, while others sabotage every opportunity they touch? And maybe the most uncomfortable question of all, what if the biggest thing holding someone back isn't their situation, but the way they think? Because the truth is, most people are not trapped financially first. They are trapped mentally first. And if that sounds harsh, good. It's supposed to, because nobody changes while feeling comfortable. And the dangerous part is that many people don't even realize the mental patterns controlling their life. They think they are making rational decisions, but most of their behavior is automatic, emotional, conditioned, built through years of repetition. Your environment shapes your beliefs. Your beliefs shape your actions, and your actions slowly shape your future. That means two people can live in the exact same city, have similar opportunities, and still end up living completely different lives. Not because one is better, but because they think differently. And psychology has been proving this for decades. The human brain adapts to the environment it spends time in. If someone grows up constantly hearing phrases like "people like us never succeed," money changes people. Rich people are evil, dreams don't work, just survive. Then, eventually, survival becomes their identity. Not growth, not ambition, not evolution, survival. And once survival becomes your mindset, everything changes. You stop thinking long-term, you stop taking risks, you stop believing effort is worth it. You start chasing immediate comfort because your brain is trying to escape stress instead of building a future. And this is where most people get trapped without realizing it. They confuse temporary relief with happiness. They spend money emotionally, they avoid difficult tasks, they procrastinate important decisions. They stay in environments that destroy their motivation. And slowly, their life becomes reactive instead of intentional. Now compare that to people who develop what psychologists often call a growth-oriented mindset. These people are not perfect, they are not robots. They feel fear too. They feel insecurity too. But their perspective is different. When they fail, they ask, what can I learn from this? When life becomes difficult, they think, how do I adapt? When they see someone successful, they think, what are they doing differently? That difference sounds small, but over time, it completely changes the direction of someone's life. Because your questions shape your focus, and your focus shapes your behavior. A person with a scarcity mindset constantly focuses on what they lack. A person with a growth mindset focuses on what they can build. One mindset creates fear, the other creates movement. And here's something most people never notice. People with strong mentalities usually think in delayed rewards. People with weak mentalities usually think in immediate emotional satisfaction. That alone explains a huge part of human behavior. Think about it. Why do some people scroll social media for 5 hours even though they know it's destroying their focus? Why do some people spend money they don't have just to impress people who don't care? Why do some people avoid learning new skills even when they know it could improve their life? Because the brain naturally seeks immediate dopamine, immediate comfort, immediate pleasure. The problem is that immediate pleasure often creates long-term pain, and long-term discipline often creates future freedom. But the human brain doesn't naturally prioritize future rewards. It prioritizes survival and comfort. That's why mindset matters so much. Because mindset is what allows someone to think beyond the present moment. And one of the biggest psychological differences between mentally rich people and mentally poor people is this. Mentally poor people ask, how do I feel right now? Mentally rich people ask, what will this decision create later? That shift changes everything. Now, this doesn't mean rich-minded people never enjoy life. That's another misunderstanding. Some people think discipline means suffering constantly. It doesn't. The goal is not to remove pleasure. The goal is to stop being controlled by pleasure. There's a difference. Because once pleasure controls your decisions, your future becomes unstable. And modern society makes this even worse. Everything today is designed to destroy patience. Fast videos, fast food, fast entertainment, instant validation. Instant dopamine. People are training their brains to avoid slowness. And success, growth, discipline, and emotional stability are all slow processes. That's why so many people feel mentally weak today. Their brain became addicted to stimulation. And a stimulated brain struggles to focus deeply. Now here's where things become dangerous. Most people blame themselves personally for their lack of discipline, but often the problem is not laziness. The problem is conditioning. A brain constantly exposed to distraction becomes distracted more easily. A brain constantly rewarded for emotional behavior becomes emotionally impulsive. A brain constantly escaping discomfort becomes weaker when facing pressure. And this explains something important. Mentality is trained, not inherited. You are not born with a strong mindset. You build it through habits, through environment, through repetition, through pain, through awareness. And that should give people hope. Because if mentality can be conditioned negatively, it can also be rebuilt positively. Now let's talk about something most people avoid discussing honestly. Victim mentality. This is one of the biggest mental traps a person can fall into. And no, this doesn't mean bad things never happen. Some people genuinely grow up in horrible environments. Some people experience trauma, poverty, abandonment, violence, psychological damage. Those things are real. But there is a psychological difference between recognizing pain and building your identity around helplessness. People trapped in victim mentality often unconsciously give away their power. Everything becomes someone else's fault forever. Society, parents, luck, the government, other people. Again, some criticisms are valid. But if someone believes they have zero control over their future, their brain stops trying. Why? Because the brain protects energy. If effort feels useless, motivation disappears. And this is why hope matters psychologically. Hope is not just emotional. It changes behavior. Studies in psychology repeatedly show that people who believe improvement is possible are more likely to take action consistently. Even small hope changes decision-making. And mentally strong people protect that hope aggressively. They avoid environments that constantly feed negativity. They become careful about what they consume mentally. Because they understand something powerful, your brain becomes what you repeatedly expose it to. If someone constantly watches negative content, complains all day, surrounds themselves with hopeless people, and avoids growth, their mentality slowly adapts to stagnation. But if someone constantly feeds their brain with learning, discipline, intelligent conversations, long-term thinking, and self-awareness, their identity slowly changes too. This is why environment matters so much, and not just physical environment. Mental environment too. What you listen to, what you watch, what you normalize, what conversations you tolerate. All of it shapes you. There's a reason why people often change dramatically after changing their circle. Humans psychologically adapt to the standards around them. If everyone around someone is lazy, ambition feels strange. If everyone around someone is disciplined, laziness feels uncomfortable. Behavior spreads socially, mindsets spread socially, and many people underestimate how much their social environment affects their future. Now let's go deeper into another psychological pattern, fear of failure. Most people think successful individuals are fearless. That's false. Psychologically, fear never fully disappears. The difference is interpretation. Weak mindsets interpret failure as identity. I failed, therefore I'm a failure. Strong mindsets interpret failure as feedback. This didn't work. Adjust and continue. That one difference completely changes resilience. Because if failure attacks your identity, you avoid risk. But if failure becomes information, growth becomes possible. And mentally rich people usually have one powerful characteristic. They detach emotion from temporary setbacks. They don't panic every time life becomes uncomfortable. They understand discomfort is part of progress. Meanwhile, emotionally reactive people often destroy their own momentum because they treat every emotional state like permanent reality. One bad day becomes, my life is falling apart, One rejection becomes, I'm not good enough. One mistake becomes, I'll never succeed. But emotions are temporary. And mentally strong people learn not to obey every emotion they feel. That skill alone can transform someone's life. Because most destructive decisions happen emotionally, not logically. And emotional control is one of the greatest forms of wealth a human being can develop. One of the strangest things about human psychology is that people rarely live according to reality. They live according to perception. Two people can experience almost the exact same situation and interpret it completely differently. One person sees difficulty and thinks, this is impossible. Another sees the same difficulty and thinks, this is training. One person sees successful people and feels envy. Another sees successful people and feels inspiration. One person sees failure as humiliation. Another sees failure as education. And over time, those interpretations become habits, then those habits become identity. And eventually, identity becomes destiny. That is why mentality matters so much. Because your mind is not just reacting to life. It is constantly shaping how you experience life. Now, there's a psychological concept that explains a huge part of this behavior. It's called learned helplessness. Researchers discovered that when people repeatedly experience situations where they feel powerless, many eventually stop trying altogether, even when opportunities appear later. Think about how dangerous that is. Someone can become so psychologically conditioned to failure that they stop recognizing possibilities. And this happens in real life more than people realize. A person fails a few times, gets rejected, feels embarrassed, loses confidence. And slowly they start expecting disappointment. Then expectation changes behavior. They stop taking risks, stop trying new things, stop believing effort matters. Not because they are incapable, but because their brain adapted to hopelessness. And this is one of the biggest differences between people with growth-oriented mentalities and people trapped mentally. Growth-oriented people interrupt negative mental conditioning early. They refuse to let temporary failure become permanent identity. That doesn't mean they never feel discouraged. It means they don't stay there mentally. Now let's talk about something that silently destroys millions of people today: comparison. Social media completely changed human psychology. For most of human history, people compared themselves to small groups around them. Now someone can compare their life to millions of strangers in minutes. And the brain is not designed for that. Psychologically, constant comparison creates emotional exhaustion. Because no matter what someone achieves, there will always be another person appearing more successful, more attractive, richer, or happier. And many people unconsciously develop inferiority complexes because of this. They begin feeling behind in life even when they are progressing normally. And this creates anxiety-driven behavior, impulsive spending, fake lifestyles, depression, burnout, constant dissatisfaction. Now here's the irony. Many of the people being admired online are deeply unhappy themselves. But perception creates illusion. And weak mentalities chase illusion constantly. Mentally strong people learn something important. They stop measuring success emotionally through other people. Instead, they measure progress internally. Am I improving? Am I becoming more disciplined? Am I mentally stronger than before? That creates stability. Because external validation is unstable. The moment someone depends on attention, approval, or status to feel valuable, their emotions become controlled by outside forces. And that is psychological dependence. Now let's connect this to money for a moment. Many people think having a rich mindset means obsessing over becoming rich financially. But real psychological wealth is deeper than that. It's emotional control, patience, strategic thinking, self-awareness, long-term behavior. The ability to delay gratification. The ability to remain calm under pressure. The ability to think independently. Those traits often create financial growth naturally over time. But more importantly, they create internal stability, and internal stability is rare today. Most people are mentally overstimulated, their attention is fragmented, their emotions are reactive, their habits are impulsive, and impulsive minds struggle to build consistent futures. Now, here's something fascinating psychologically. Your brain becomes attached to familiarity, even when familiarity is painful. This explains why many people stay trapped in bad habits, toxic relationships, and destructive environments. The brain prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar uncertainty. Because uncertainty feels threatening, that means growth often feels uncomfortable at first. Not because it's wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. This is why mentally strong people learn how to tolerate temporary discomfort. They understand that discomfort is often a sign of adaptation. A person learning discipline feels resistance. A person building confidence feels awkward initially. A person improving socially may feel anxiety at first. But mentally weak people interpret discomfort as danger. So they retreat back into familiar patterns. And over time, comfort becomes a prison. Now let's discuss another major difference between mentally rich and mentally poor people. Ownership. Mentally weak people often wait. They wait for motivation, wait for opportunities, wait for confidence, wait for perfect conditions. But mentally strong people take psychological ownership over their actions, even when conditions are imperfect. And that's powerful because ownership creates movement. The moment someone says, "My actions matter," their brain starts searching for solutions. But the moment someone says, "Nothing I do changes anything," their brain shuts down effort. This is why mindset directly affects behavior biologically. Beliefs influence action. Action influences results. Results reinforce beliefs. And that cycle can either destroy someone or transform them. Now, another thing most people never notice. Rich-minded people usually think in systems. Poor-minded people usually think emotionally. For example, a person with a weak mentality says, "I need motivation." A strong mentality says, "I need structure." A weak mentality says, "I hope I feel productive tomorrow." A strong mentality says, "What habits make productivity easier?" A weak mentality depends on feelings. A strong mentality builds systems that function despite feelings. That difference changes everything long term, because emotions fluctuate constantly, but systems reduce chaos. And mentally strong people understand this intuitively. Now let's talk about ego. Ego silently destroys growth, especially fragile ego. People with fragile egos hate looking inexperienced. They avoid asking questions, avoid learning publicly, avoid mistakes, avoid criticism. Because psychologically, their self-worth is too attached to appearing competent. But growth requires temporary incompetence. Every skilled person was once terrible. Every confident person was once insecure. Every disciplined person was once inconsistent. But ego makes people quit too early. They would rather protect their image than improve their reality. And this is why humility is psychologically powerful. Humility allows adaptation, learning, correction, growth. Mentally rich people are usually more willing to admit, "I don't know enough yet." And ironically, that mindset helps them improve faster. Now here's something deeply important. Your future is often hidden inside your daily standards. Not your dreams, not your goals, your standards. What behavior do you tolerate from yourself daily? What excuses do you normalize? What habits do you repeat? Because repeated behavior shapes identity much more than intention. And many people have high goals with low standards. They want extraordinary futures while maintaining destructive habits. Psychologically, that creates internal conflict. Because the brain notices inconsistency between identity and behavior. And eventually behavior wins. That's why mentally strong people focus heavily on daily patterns, not just motivation, not just ambition. Patterns, because patterns compound. A single decision rarely changes someone's life instantly, but repeated decisions slowly reshape everything. And this is one of the biggest secrets behind long-term success psychologically. Small repeated behaviors are more powerful than intense temporary effort. Most people underestimate consistency because consistency feels boring. It feels slow. But psychologically, repetition rewires the brain. Every repeated action strengthens neural pathways, meaning your habits literally become easier over time. That means discipline initially feels difficult, but eventually becomes more automatic. And this is where mentally rich people separate themselves. They are willing to endure short-term discomfort for long-term freedom. Meanwhile, mentally weak people sacrifice long-term freedom for short-term emotional comfort. And over years, Those choices create completely different lives. Now here's the part most people never hear. Developing a strong mentality is not about becoming emotionless. It's not about pretending life is easy. It's not about becoming obsessed with money, status, or success. Real mental wealth is much quieter than that. It's the ability to stay stable while life becomes unstable. It's the ability to think clearly when emotions are loud. It's the ability to keep moving forward without needing constant validation from the world. And in a society built on distraction, emotional impulses, and comparison, that kind of mindset becomes extremely rare, but it can be built. And that's the important part, because many people secretly believe mentality is fixed. They think, this is just who I am, but psychology repeatedly shows that identity is flexible. Human beings adapt constantly. The brain rewires through repetition. Thought patterns can change. Behavior can change. Self-perception can change. The problem is that most people never consciously train their mentality. They train distraction instead. Think about the average modern routine. Wake up, check phone immediately. Consume endless information. Compare yourself to strangers online, react emotionally to everything, avoid discomfort. Seek entertainment constantly. Repeat. And then people wonder why they feel mentally exhausted, anxious, and unmotivated. Because the brain becomes what it repeatedly practices, and most people are unknowingly practicing mental weakness every single day. Practicing distraction, practicing impulsiveness, practicing emotional dependency, practicing avoidance. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine someone intentionally training focus, training patience, training discipline, training emotional control, training delayed gratification. That person slowly becomes psychologically different, not overnight, but gradually. And gradual transformation is more powerful than sudden motivation, because sudden motivation disappears. Identity-based change lasts. Now let's talk about one of the biggest shifts someone can make mentally. Stopping the need to look successful and starting the need to become valuable. This changes everything. A weak mindset focuses heavily on appearance, looking rich, looking productive, looking important. But mentally strong people focus more on substance, skills, knowledge, emotional stability, competence, because appearance creates temporary attention, but value creates long-term opportunities. And many people destroy their future trying to impress people in the present. Psychologically, this often comes from insecurity. People seek external validation because internally they feel incomplete, and social media amplifies this behavior constantly. But mentally rich people slowly detach their self-worth from public perception. They stop asking, how do I look? And start asking, who am I becoming? That question changes behavior dramatically. Now, another psychological trait that separates strong-minded individuals is emotional regulation. This is one of the most valuable skills a human being can develop, because emotions influence almost every decision people make. Anger, fear, jealousy, insecurity, excitement, impulsiveness. Most people are controlled by these states without realizing it. And emotionally reactive people often sabotage themselves repeatedly. They quit too fast, spend emotionally, say things impulsively, destroy opportunities during moments of frustration. Meanwhile, emotionally intelligent people pause before reacting. They observe themselves. They recognize emotions without obeying every emotion automatically. And that creates power, because the ability to control yourself internally creates freedom externally. Now let's discuss another uncomfortable truth. Many people say they want success, but psychologically they fear responsibility because growth changes expectations. Success requires consistency, discipline, accountability, pressure, and subconsciously. Some people prefer familiar struggle because it protects them from higher expectations. This is why self-sabotage exists. Someone gets close to improving, then suddenly destroys their progress, not because they consciously want failure, but because psychologically change feels threatening. And mentally strong people learn to face that fear instead of escaping it. They understand growth always requires uncertainty. Now here's another major shift. Mentally rich people stop romanticizing motivation. Motivation is unreliable. Some days it exists, some days it disappears completely. If someone only acts when motivated, their life becomes unstable. That's why systems matter more than emotions. Strong-minded people build routines, structures, standards, and those systems continue functioning even when emotions fluctuate. This is one reason why discipline creates freedom psychologically, because discipline reduces chaos. The more chaotic someone's habits are, the more mentally exhausted they usually feel. Now let's talk about attention. Attention is one of the most valuable forms of wealth today, because whatever controls your attention slowly controls your life. And modern platforms compete aggressively for human attention, notifications, short videos, algorithms, endless stimulation. The result? Many people can no longer focus deeply. And without deep focus, building meaningful skills becomes extremely difficult. Mentally rich people understand this, so they protect their attention carefully. They become intentional about what enters their mind. They reduce unnecessary stimulation, because they know mental clarity affects decision-making, and decision-making shapes life outcomes. Now here's something powerful. Your future is often hidden inside your repeated daily behaviors. Not dramatic moments, not giant breakthroughs, daily patterns. How you think when stressed, how you react to failure, what you consume mentally, what you tolerate repeatedly, what standards you maintain privately. Those small behaviors slowly build identity, and identity eventually shapes destiny. This is why mentally strong individuals become careful with repetition, because repetition creates conditioning. If someone repeatedly avoids hard conversations, they condition avoidance. If someone repeatedly escapes discomfort, they condition weakness. If someone repeatedly chooses discipline, they condition resilience. And eventually those patterns feel natural. Now, one final thing that separates mentally rich people from mentally poor people: long-term vision. Weak mentalities often live emotionally from moment to moment. Strong mentalities think beyond the current emotion. They understand life is built slowly. That meaningful growth takes time. That patience matters. And patience is becoming rare. People want instant transformation, instant confidence, instant success. But psychologically, real change usually happens gradually and quietly. And many people quit because progress feels invisible at first. That's why consistency matters so much. Because consistency allows invisible progress to accumulate. A person reading 10 pages a day may not notice immediate transformation. But over years, that habit changes thinking completely. A person improving emotionally little by little may not notice daily changes, but eventually they become unrecognizable compared to their past self. And that is how real growth happens, not through dramatic moments alone, but through repeated choices nobody applauds initially. Now imagine someone fully understanding this. They stop chasing shortcuts. Stop chasing appearances. Stop depending on emotion constantly. And instead, they begin building themselves slowly, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, one habit at a time, one decision at a time, one standard at a time. That person may not look extraordinary immediately, but over time, they become dangerous in the best possible way. Calm under pressure, focused, disciplined, patient, emotionally stable, difficult to manipulate, difficult to distract. And in a world filled with impulsiveness, comparison, and mental chaos, that kind of mindset becomes a superpower. Because at the end of the day, real wealth is not just about money. It's about control. Control over your emotions, your habits, your focus, your decisions, your future. And the people who learn to control themselves internally are usually the ones who eventually change their lives externally too.